Welcome back to Sleep for Performance Radio. Today I'm joined by Vanessa Riethmeister. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Vanessa is a holder of a PhD. She resides in the Netherlands, originally from Germany, and she works in the oil and gas industry. This was an excellent conversation once again with Vanessa. I've met Vanessa a couple of years ago in Australia at a conference and really wanted to have her on to talk about her PhD research and some of her findings from the area of mining oil and gas. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at Sleep4Perform or on Facebook, Sleep4Performance. And you can send me an email or any feedback or comments at iandunican@sleep4performance.com.au. Now, if you have a moment or two and you're enjoying the podcast, we'd really appreciate a review on iTunes to bump us up so we can share the episode out and more people can see it. And if you haven't done so already, please go to sleep4performance.com.au and sign up for our newsletters. And every month we have a podcast episode, an audio abstract, and a blog and a newsletter that comes out with some additional information that can be sent to you. We won't spam you. We'll just send you out the newsletter once a month. And again, you can forward that on to friends, family, and whoever else you think may benefit from it. We've also had a number of people call us up, email us and ask us if they can share the website in their business, if they can share it with friends, if they can put it on an internal intranet. And the answer to that question is yes. You can use it in any which way you want. Sleep4performance.com.au is completely free. The information is there for everybody to use. And so there's no need to ask for permission. Just go ahead and use that info. Obviously, don't copy and paste and say it's yours in an email or a blog, but just, link people back to the website completely, 100% free. Some people have actually put that as a portal on their own intranets in their business as a link, and you can go in there and access that information. So please utilize that. We're going to have a few adverts here, and then we'll get straight into the episode with Vanessa.
Exercise and diet are well established in society as two pillars for optimizing our health. However, both are supported by a foundation that is often forgotten, yet even more integral to our health, namely sleep. The Sleep Recovery Specialist course is an innovative online education experience that provides an in-depth knowledge base, important sleep assessment tools, and a wide range of effective strategies for supporting clients to improve their sleep habits and behaviors. Improve your sense of happiness and well-being, daily energy and alertness, recovery from physical training, reduce risk of obesity and diabetes, and reduce your appetite and sweet cravings. Achieve all of this and more. For further information and to enroll online, please visit www.nordicfitnesseducationblog.com.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Mark Bubbs, and I'm excited to announce my new book, Peak, The New Science of Athletic Performance That is Revolutionizing Sports, is available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Chapters Indigo, and local booksellers before its release on May 24th. Peak is a groundbreaking book exploring the fundamentals of high performance, not the fads, the importance of consistency, not extreme effort, and the value of patience, not rapid transformation. Peak explores the leading experts, such as Dr. Ian Dunican, who are influencing the top performers in sports on how to achieve world-class success. What are performance professionals saying about Peak? Dr. Rocco Monto, orthopedic surgeon, Team USA physician, and author of The Fountain, says, Peak is a masterpiece of nutritional science from one of the world's leading authorities of athletic health and performance. It's a fantastic resource that provides a roadmap to reaching true wellness. Kelly Olynyk, forward for the NBA's Miami Heat, says, a must-read for athletes and everyone alike. Peak is an immeasurable tool to becoming the best you can be. And Dr. Fergus Connolly, PhD, performance expert and author of Game Changer and 59 Lessons, says, Peak is one of the most impressive and detailed books on applied sports science ever published, a must-have for any practitioner in performance. Regardless if you're trying to improve your physique, propel your endurance performance, or improve your team's record, Peak is about being an expert in the fundamentals and assumes that while top athletes are born, they can also be made. Pick up your copy of Peak today.
Vanessa, welcome to Sleep for Performance Radio. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm very good. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Now, Vanessa, I have a big issue on this podcast. My problem in my life is I cannot pronounce people's second name or surname. So how do we pronounce your surname?
It's Vanessa Riethmeister. So it's a quite unique German name. I think there are not that many people in the world that have that last name.
Ah. Now, although you are German, you don't live in Germany, do you?
No, I don't. I've been living in the Netherlands for 10 plus years now.
10 plus years. So next door neighbor, just jump over the fence from Germany into the Netherlands and work away.
Yeah, fair enough. I think for me, so I currently live in The Hague, which is 2.5 hours from where I grew up, which is in Cologne in Germany. But if I would want to go to the north of the Netherlands, it's actually longer. So yeah. I feel like I'm closer to home now than I've been for the last 7 years when I lived up in the north. So it's quite interesting.
I have a friend who's from the Netherlands originally, but he's near the German border, and he lives here in Australia. And he was home a few years ago with his wife, and she found it quite fascinating and funny that they went for an evening run one evening, and it was like 2.5, 3 kilometers, something like that, to the German border. So her joke was we ran to Germany and back one evening. So she found it quite funny. I think people who are not from Europe or haven't been, when they get there, they're quite surprised how everything is so close to each other and you can just go from country to country.
Well, you should definitely take her to the south of the Netherlands, because then you can actually, I think within like a few meters, you're in 3 different countries.
Oh, really?
So, yes.
Well, this has turned into a geography lesson now.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's great. So, Vanessa, why did you go to the Netherlands from Germany? Why not stay in Germany? What was the attraction?
So when I finished high school, I knew that I wanted to do something with languages, but I was also very interested in anything related to the medical field. So I was just thinking, how can I combine it? And I think the most straightforward option for me was to study in a different language. And then I looked at that time, I was only fluent in English. So I looked for places where I could study anything in Europe that is somehow in the health area and that offer it in English. And of course you would think about maybe the UK, but then the study fees are, I don't know, 1,000-fold more expensive to what it would be in Germany.
Yeah.
So I looked for other options, and then I actually came across programs in the Netherlands or in Italy. So I had a look, I drove my little car back in the days up to Groningen, where I studied and where I ended up studying, and I just fell in love with the city, and I thought it was far away from home, as in like a 3 to 4 hour drive, but still quite close to home. And I was a bit ignorant at the time, thinking, oh, Dutch is basically just another German accent, but I found out later it's definitely a different language. But yeah, so I ended up studying psychology in English in Groningen, in the Netherlands.
Very, very interesting. So most people, are daunted by the challenge of just going to university, but you thought, no, I'll go to university and do it in a different language. So, you are maybe a risk taker, maybe you're a bit crazy, or maybe you're just, I don't know. Like for me, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because somehow I always ended up not choosing the easiest way, because then, well, I guess, yeah, studying in a different language is one of the aspects, but then I also ended up doing 2 masters at the same time, and I also somehow got myself in the position that I did my PhD, but also worked at the same time. So I felt like I always just look for an extra challenge, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, you might be like the female version of me, Vanessa, because that's what I did. I did my undergrad while I was working. After I left the military, and I was working at a mining company, I did my undergraduate. I did 2 masters while I was working, plus trained for a 100k run, plus was traveling around the world in that job, and then finally got sense when I wanted to do a PhD and took some time off work to go back and do a full time. So you might be the female version of me, where you just look for hardship in your life.
Yes,
and I was certainly the same.
Although I must say, I'm a horrible runner, and I could never do a 100k run. So chapeau for that.
Yeah, well, it's just a good way of keeping me away from drugs and alcohol. So yeah. So Vanessa, you and I actually met at a dinner near Ayers Rock about 2 years
Yep.
ago, when we were at a conference called a Working Time Society. And that's, I think you were sitting at the same table as myself and Raymond Matthews, who was actually on the podcast last month. And that's where I think I first got speaking to you about some of your research and some of your work. And then I saw you present, I think, the next day with some of the stuff you've been doing in oil and gas around sort of fatigue management. So that's kind of where we kind of first met and had some interaction from a scientific perspective. But I want to step back from that and understand, how did you go, leaving the challenges of language and location aside, how did you go from psychology into sleep? What made you kind of head down that path? What was your career progression?
Yeah, sure. So after I completed my bachelor's in psychology, I actually thought about going back to medicine. And I spoke to like a guidance counselor at the university. But unfortunately, how it works in the Netherlands is if you switch degrees, but they are actually quite similar, then it's I think it was like 10,000 euros for a semester. It was like a ridiculous amount for me to switch from psychology to medicine, because it's just too close to each other, because they both fall into like the health sciences. But a switch that I could do, basically just like for the normal fee, was to go to epidemiology. So I applied for a research master in epidemiology, and I got in, and I started doing the research master program. And then I found out that in the Netherlands you can do a second master for free. So hence I ended up doing 2 masters, and I just figured it would be worthwhile to complete my psychology degree. So I also started a second master in Industrial and Organisational Psychology. So that's how I ended up finishing these 2 at the same time. But whilst I was in my research master, the second year of the research master program is that you basically have to do like a research internship. And at the time, I thought about doing it with Philips to look at the effects of lighting in hospitals, and how also like being exposed to like a natural environment. So seeing trees from your window could actually help you recover quicker. So that was my idea, what I wanted to do. But at the same time, the NAM, so the Nederlandse Aardoliemaatschappij, which is like the Dutch petroleum company, they approached the hospital that I was working for, and they were looking for somebody to do research in for healthy aging among offshore workers, because they just came with a business case saying that we're quite worried on our offshore platforms. We see that people are a bit older than our normal populations are, and they have a lot of like minor injuries, or minor accidents happening, so some of the slip, trips and falls, etc. And they just wanted somebody to look into that in a bit more detail. So then the hospital approached me with that business case pretty much, and asked me if I would like to switch from my initial idea and do that project instead. And I was quite intrigued, especially, well, I've heard about offshore rigs, and I don't know, I've seen probably pictures, or yeah, I had this like very dirty middle-aged guy in my mind who's just kind of, covered in oil, working on one of those oil rigs. But yeah, so I was very intrigued and thought, yeah, that might be quite cool to do actually. And it was close by as well, because the Dutch petroleum company is actually a joint venture with Shell, and they are like a 20-minute train ride away from Groningen. So the other one would have been in the south of the Netherlands. So I would have had to travel quite a bit to actually get to Philips. So it just seemed like a natural way to do that project instead.
So it's interesting, because I find with lots of the people we've had on the podcast, or lots of people I've researched with, or lots of people I've interacted with, nobody kind of sets off from high school and goes, right, I want to be a sleep scientist, or I want to be a scientist that investigates sleep and performance, or any of these things. Everybody seems to fall into it from different angles or different ways. So some people come in from psychology, some people come in from health and safety, some people come in from neuroscience, some people come in from medicine, other people come in from a HR, human resources point of view. So everybody has these weird and wonderful paths into the science of sleep in the world, and it's quite interesting. that people
No,
come from those different areas.
It's definitely the same case for me. It was
Yeah.
being at the right place at the right time, and somehow being exposed to the offshore or the oil and gas environment.
Yeah.
And then whilst I was doing that initial study, which was focused on sustainable employment and healthy aging, just like sleep came up as one of the main factors that people were worried about. And and so then somehow my PhD then revolved around sleep and fatigue.
Yeah.
So it was indeed not my initial thought coming from high school, but I absolutely loved the challenge I was presented with, and I still like the topic.
Can we just step back to your master's, because you just you hit a point there that I've been looking at recently. So I spent some time with a guy called Russell Foster, who's a professor from Oxford University, who you may know. So Russell, he's pretty famous on the BBC a lot. He's done a lot of stuff in the area of circadian biology, neuroscience and physiology and so on. Russell was here in Australia, and we were presenting actually to oil and gas companies in the northwest of Australia. And there was some people there from your company that you were mentioning there a moment ago, Shell, as there was from others. But one of the things that Russell presented in a community talk was this thing about light and aging, and sort of the lighting levels in old folks' homes or old age care, lighting levels in hospital, and the effect that has on sort of daily mood and performance, the effect that has on sleep. Can you just expand a bit more on that sort of that piece of work and how that may affect people, and what potentially were you going to look at in that area?
Yeah, so of course I did not end up getting, but in the end I didn't study that particular topic. But when I first looked into the area, I was just fascinated by the fact on, but this was all in a hospital environment, of course, and usually you think of it as being quite sterile, so like white walls, bright lighting, like fluorescent light almost, and I didn't even consider the fact that it would impact your sleep necessarily, but of course that's, knowing now, it's one of the main contributors also just for your general health and well-being. But it's fascinating when you look into just like the natural, like even when you go through a forest or like a botanical garden, what kind of calming effect that has on you.
Yeah.
And they looked at all different variables. So they of course they asked people, so it's like subjective reports, but also when you see how much it impacts your physical health as well, because they see that wound healing was quicker, and all of these aspects that were related to surgery actually improved drastically after. So that was quite interesting. And now having been a sleep researcher for the last 5-6 years, I can definitely see how if we're only exposed to artificial light, so when you're really in like an ICU environment, that not necessarily benefits your health, because it might mess with your circadian rhythm, which might then, in addition, add to your problems that you might be facing. And of course, now I'm speculating because I've not studied this, so this is just some theories that I've come up with my head after being a sleep researcher, and also how when they're planning new hospitals now, how they really try to have many windows and maybe also change the colors on the walls, and so to really bring that nature aspect back in. Yeah.
No, I think it's great to speculate, because I think you're right. I think from an overall, not just sleep, but sort of mood, mental health, how people feel, their total human optimization. I think having lots of natural light during the day, spending some time out in nature, being exposed to
normal day and night rhythms.
Normal day and night rhythms, sort of plants, biology, wildlife, whatever you might want to call it, or however you want to group it, I think really does help, and for lots of people that I know, they've said when they take some time out of work or to go out, sort of into the bush or into the woods or the forest, they do definitely feel better if they go for a run, particularly if they go running, on tracks and trails as opposed to running around the city. Definitely seems to sort of synchronize them, as does, swimming in the ocean, this sort of grounding effect of being in nature. So I think there's definitely something in it. Definitely difficult to quantify, probably more, like you say, about subjective stuff. But in saying that, if it feels good and it's working for people and people enjoy it, well, still they should keep doing it, so even
I completely agree.
yeah,
Yes.
even the lack of hard objective scientific data, if it's working well, keep going, and we'll figure out a way to measure it. We did slightly digress, so I do want to come back to your PhD topics, because it is quite interesting in this area of shift workers in oil and gas. What was the overarching kind of the goal of your PhD thesis when you picked it up and started working on this problem? What was some of the research problems you were trying to address?
I think if I had to pick one overarching ambition of the project, it was just to get more insights into the sleep and fatigue problems that occur when people are working on shifts offshore. Of course, so our focus shifted a bit from the very beginning of my PhD towards, in the middle and towards the end of it, because initially we started with this healthy aging, sustainable employability approach. So really thinking, okay, if we know more about it, then it actually might help people to stay with us for longer periods of time, and also just improve their general mental and physical well-being. So that was like I think in the first half year or so, that was our main focus. But then like reading more about the existing research that had been done, and really also speaking to the offshore workers, it digressed slightly, just because we knew that some of the studies already existed, but we also saw the links with safety, for example. So of course, like very clear links when we talk about safety at work. So being more alert when you're doing maybe HSSE critical tasks. So these are health, safety, and security, and environmental critical tasks. So for anyone who's not aware of the oil and gas environment, there are risks of, for example, like a blowout. So anybody who had seen maybe Deepwater Horizon might know that some of the tasks these guys have to perform are quite safety critical. So if you have people operating it who are not alert, of course that can create major problems, because we know also people who are fatigued, they are poor communicators usually. So communication is key for almost everything, but if they can't tell people who might work on the other side of the oil rig or offshore platform, or who are people in the control rooms, etc., that might cause problems. So it was very interesting to then see what different areas it has, and also going back actually, and not just focusing purely on the time people are on the platform, but also how do people get there and how do people get home again. That was also quite interesting, because then you tap into more like the road safety area, and a bit of a gray area also when we think about what is the responsibility of the employer, and when does the responsibility of the employee kicks in. And this commuting time is a bit of that gray area that people or companies might not necessarily consider to be one of their problems. But of course, if people get, so in the Netherlands, they usually work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or maybe 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So have worked that 2 or 3 weeks, and then they might have to drive for another 8 hours to get home. And people want to be home as quickly as possible. But then if they're maybe too tired to do that, maybe it's worthwhile to either do a bit of car sharing with someone who's in the area, or who maybe somebody gets to pick them up, or they take an additional day in a hotel. So it was very interesting to then see how that like small initial aim of the project just kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger when we really tapped into their life, or the life of an offshore worker, and what's part of it.
This is really interesting, Vanessa, because a lot of people would look at the industry of, let's say, mining, oil and gas collectively, and say, these high-risk extractive industries, and go, well, because there's so much risk, we must really understand what's going on from a fatigue perspective. But as you would know, when you do start, scouring the literature and looking for this stuff, for mining, oil and gas papers looking at the areas of sleep and fatigue, there's probably less than 15 papers out there. There's very, very little done in this area. And I know from my time working in mining companies internally and consulting externally, and then working with the ICMM and IPECA and OGP, very little published research on this, but most definitely a shared problem. So the type of rosters and the type of issues that you're telling the listeners today about from the European region happen in Australia, happen in America, South America. No matter where you go, these issues are inherent to mining oil and gas, whether it be on platforms or mines that are on, a physical location in somewhere like Australia, where people are flying home after a period of time away and then commuting home during high risk. Or, like you said, what are they doing on their time off? Are they flying, back from a sort of North Sea oil and gas platform, flying back to London and then going to, Thailand for 2 weeks, or Las Vegas, and gambling and drinking, and then coming back even more tired than when they were on shift. So it's interesting that, the stuff that you're raising as issues in this area is something that's across the whole industry collectively.
Yeah, and then it's get even more severe. For example, in Norway, they usually operate 2 weeks on, 4 weeks off. So your off periods are longer than your on periods. And then people actually just have a second job. Yeah. So it's not like they take time to recover, but then they might own a shop, or they might, I don't know, work in a family business somewhere. So yeah. And then you think you give them enough time to rest and really recover from the offshore work period, but usually people then don't take it. Or it's also interesting to see different stages in life, because a lot of people said that like middle ages are more difficult because they have other obligations once they go back home. So they have, I don't know, maybe small children to care for, or so actually their sleep sometimes is better when they're offshore, because they just get more rest and they don't wake up from children or, babies crying at night. But then actually, it was very, very interesting. I spoke to the guys about work-family conflict. And then they said, no, it's not the middle ages that are the difficult part. It's actually after. It's when the children leave the home environment, and then maybe their wives are home alone, and then they perceive this 2 weeks or 3 weeks that their partners are offshore as such a difficult time. And then that's why a lot of marital problems arise. And then actually you see more divorces then than when the children were at home and the wife was just busy caring for them. I thought that was very, very interesting, and see like how the problems shifted from middle age to a slightly older age.
So Vanessa, how would you describe the oil and gas workers that you have observed? Like, what age are they? What sort of height, weight, BMI? What's the general kind of health demographics you could say from your research? What would the typical oil and gas worker be?
I was very, very surprised because I told you earlier, right? So my mental image was this like bit like heavier, very strong, kind of like dirty looking, like oil dripping guy, like a rough guy who works offshore. But they're just the nicest and very like lovely people that work offshore. And of course the demographics are I want to say maybe 95% male who work offshore regularly. So I came across 2 other females in all of my offshore visits so far. And there was one lady who worked like in facilities. So she was doing laundry and cleaning, etc. And then there was one like an oil and gas professional who worked as an OIM, so offshore installation manager on the platforms. Quite like the person offshore with the most responsibilities. And there are growing numbers of female offshore workers, but it's a male-dominated world. And I would say usually, I'd say ages are like late 40s, average age, I would say. And it's shifting now because they had at least in the Dutch Central North Sea part, they had a bit of an age gap, so they hence why I did the healthy aging study as well. So they saw that the demographics was just shifting towards older age, and they were lacking this in-between middle age group, and then they just kind of were recruiting lots and lots of younger guys mainly to work offshore. So hence why the statistics are a bit screwed in that way when I just give you the mean age of them. But on average, I'd say end 40s, unfortunately slightly overweight, not like a bit more than the average population for the Netherlands, if I'd say like a comparison group, but not extremely, because they have to do medical stringent tests every 2 to 3 years. Otherwise, they lose their offshore diploma, their certificate. So their weight is being monitored. Some of the other health vitals are monitored. So actually, at least in the Netherlands, there's a weight restriction. So then they have like a waist-hip ratio, and they look at the BMI. And usually, when people are getting to like a morbidly obese phase, they wouldn't be able to go offshore because they have to fit through the windows of the helicopter, and they have to be able to walk stairs. And so in general, I'd say the physical health is quite good. What else to say? Very lovely people in a sense that they see their offshore workforce as a second family. So it's a family away from home. So they make sure actually that, they help each other and have this very the bit of banter always goes on offshore. But in a very nice way. So
And obviously, when they're on these offshore platforms, they're very small, restricted spaces. They don't have access to alcohol, or they can't walk down the road and, go to a shop. So it's a very, small, confined space. It's very highly regulated. It can be a high risk environment. So there's lots of controls in place.
Yes,
that'd be a good way of explaining it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Zero tolerance when it comes to alcohol or drugs. So yeah.
And so when you looked at the sleep then, Vanessa, of these guys on the platforms, what was the kind of typical sleep that somebody would be getting if they were working, well, let's say a day shift and then a night shift? How much duration would they get?
So usually the day shifts would be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then people would get roughly about 6 hours sleep per night. And when I looked at, so in the sleep studies that I've done, usually it was about an hour less than they would get when they were in their normal sleep environment. An hour between an hour and a half, they would get less sleep offshore every night. So that's...
and so why do you think that might be, given the fact that, a lot of people say they sleep better aware, but then obviously that doesn't always manifest in terms of the actigraphy data. And I know you collect actigraphy in your study, so a very good measure for shift work, a very good methodology for collecting sleep measures in shift workers, particularly in this environment, because you get like lots of good data over time. But lots of people say they sleep better. So do you think it might be it's better quality, or even though it's less duration?
So there are several aspects I think we need to consider, and we don't know 100% what are the potential causes of it, but some things people have mentioned is they work their 12-hour shifts, but actually they can't finish the work in 12 hours. So especially the more senior you are on the platform, the more likely you are to do maybe 1 or 2 more hours of admin work in the evenings. So actually their workday is a bit longer, hence they need to squeeze in any dinners or exercise or whatever they would like to do in that short period of time, which also then restricts their sleep period that they get. So that's one factor. Sometimes, luckily, there is Wi-Fi on most of the platforms that is usually working. So then they Skype their families and friends. So one bit is
Hello?
Being exposed to the blue light, of course, and I'm sure maybe you've talked about this in previous podcasts, but the blue light that we see from phones or laptops or iPads that is coming from these devices actually makes it a bit more difficult for you to fall asleep. So being live, and I have the scenario in my head now that they're in their cabin, lying in bed, Skyping their friends and family, and then that's when they want to go to sleep immediately after, but then they can't because they've just had this bright light shining in their eyes and actually making it more difficult for them to fall asleep. So that's another potential explanation. And also just the quality of the beds. So I doubt a lot. Most of my study participants were Dutch. So if you've ever been to the Netherlands, they're the tallest people you meet probably. And they complained a lot just by like general ergonomics. So it's the beds were too short, or the mattresses weren't, to match to the body types. And sometimes you share a cabin with somebody else, so it's actually less comfortable for you from a general sleep environment as well. So that could be another factor why they might have slept less. Or that the quality wasn't as good, or they felt less refreshed when they woke up. But in general, what I found in my study is, so with the actigraphy you mentioned, we saw that the sleep efficiency percentage, and that's a measure that looks at how quickly you fall asleep and how long you are asleep, that was actually a bit better when they were offshore. But this could also be that they might be so exhausted from the work and from the day that they had just experienced that they just fall asleep immediately. So that could also be an explanation. So I know I've given you several things now, but it's of course difficult to really, really pinpoint what has happened, because it wasn't in a lab environment, but it was in a field study that we conducted, and we weren't sitting, or like we did not have cameras in everyone's sleep cabin to really see what they did just before they fell asleep.
Yeah. No, I think it's good to say there's lots of things, Vanessa, because this is the challenge when we look at sleep. You can't just look at sleep from the time you get into bed and close your eyes. You have to look at this in this whole 24/7 cycle about what's happening when you wake up in the morning, what's happening in the evening, how much work is happening, and you have to look at it holistically, because all these other factors actually do affect, So a lot of times when I speak to people about improving their sleep, I'll talk about caffeine, alcohol, diet, physical activity, and people go, what's that got to do with sleep? No, it's like your whole day is about, you got to look at it on two sides of the coin. You got to look at what you're doing during the day and how that may or may not affect your sleep. And conversely, then you got to look at your sleep and how much sleep you're getting and how that's going to affect your next day. So you got to be constantly balancing the both sides of this equation each and every day to try to get optimal performance. So it's good to say that there's all these things, because I think people have this idea in the sleep world and the performance world that we just kind of make a change, on one of the inputs, and then we get this result at the end. And dealing with people is not like dealing with a piece of plant or machinery. We don't have these inputs and a process happening and get outputs. We can change the inputs for many people, and we can get 10 different outputs. But what we're trying to do is, improve everybody. But there's always going to be a degree of variability as we go forward. So I think it's good to say there's lots in this, because there is,
Yeah, and I'm sure I could probably list another 5 to 10 potential options. So no, I completely agree with you, and they all interact, and it's you can't just fix one and then expect everything to change. So
what I am interested in, Vanessa, with this group is, and you may or may not have looked at this, I can't remember if I saw it in some of your research papers, but you may be able to comment on it more broadly, is what do you think maybe the percentage, or did you find any of these guys on these offshore platforms at risk of having a potential sleep disorder? Was that something you did look at? Or did people complain about potentially having a disorder with sleep, such as obstructive sleep apnea, insomnia, restless legs, or whatever it may be?
Yeah, so we gave them a questionnaire in the beginning, and we were asking about their medical status and whether they had a sleep disorder, yes or no. And we had one diagnosed sleep disorder in it, and the other, I think we had maybe one or two that thought they might have one, but it wasn't diagnosed by a physician. And then the other people indicated that they didn't have one, and we did not have access to their medical records, so we couldn't really go and double check if that was true. So it was only based on that intake survey questionnaire that we gave them.
Yeah.
I do believe, and that was also when I also conducted interviews with the offshore workers, it could be an underdiagnosed issue at hand, because even in the medical examinations that I mentioned earlier, sleep is not the main area physicians look at. It's not, one of the, if you have a BMI of 35, that's a red flag. But if they don't ask enough questions to really red flag a potential sleep problem. So I think that's just like it's almost like the offshore workers have to tell them from the general physician or other medical exams that this might be at hand. And of course they do regulate. So in the medical intake for the offshore certification, they look at the medications people use. And some medications are allowed offshore, whereas some are not. And that's related then, of course, to the severity of the diseases that people are suffering with. And I think in general, for example, taking some form of melatonin pills that might help you sleep, they're not on the blacklist. So that's something people can use. And we have asked as well in their sleep diaries whether they have taken any medication, but that wasn't the case for any of the participants in my study. But I do, just kind of looking at their actograms, so the graphs from the actigraphy, there might have been one or two that could potentially have something, and in the individual reports we just basically told them we can't diagnose this, but maybe it's worthwhile to speak to your physicians about it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So Vanessa, as sort of the oil and gas industry changes, and even mining and lots of industries change with technology applications, and we see lots of remote operation centers occurring. We see people operating, ROVs, these remote operated vehicles, from a fair distance away. We see more automation happening, and we see less people being put in these operational environments. Do you think as we move to these remote operations, we will eliminate or reduce fatigue, or do you think we will just have a different type of fatigue in a 24/7 operation?
I don't think we can ever completely eliminate fatigue. As long as we're still human beings and we need our sleep, then odds are is we're gonna suffer from fatigue in some way or the other. But I think with this new technology coming up, we might be better in identifying when we are fatigued. We might have alarms that go off in the form of, I don't know, and a watch that might tell us that we're fatigued. Who knows what the future will bring. And also, we're creating more and more awareness about it. So that's a good aspect. And the problem that occurs with having more of this remote control room kind of work is that people are they need to be alert all the time, and they have all of these stimuli getting at them. So they have to look at all of these screens, and they might have to monitor various operations at the same time. So that's fatiguing in itself already. So I wouldn't say that we're eliminating the fatigue risk. We might eliminate the immediate, so we don't have a worker standing next to a well that when the blowout occurs would, maybe die immediately because that person is in a remote location. But I think the dangers of fatigue are ever present, even if we have this person sitting hundreds of kilometers away in a control room operating that specific task. So it's a different form of hazard, and something that will evolve over time, and we will have to adjust our fatigue risk management approaches accordingly, but it's not something that we will ever be able to eliminate completely.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, because I think a lot of people tend to think that because we don't work in an operation, we're not in an operational environment, or even for military people, because we're not actually on the ground, they've eliminated the risk. And I've said something similar to what you've said as well, is you may not have eliminated completely, but you've changed the risk. So, if people are sitting down all day looking at screens, well, there's probably more chance in a dark, cold environment that they're going to start gaining more weight because they're not moving around. Whereas on an oil and gas, yeah,
you asked me about the sleep and fatigue specific aspect of it, but when you just introduced it, I was really thinking about how the work has changed and how that has resulted in increased weight with the workers, because their food hasn't changed, and the concept of food offshore is so big, and everything revolves around their 3 meals a day, and usually they have the option to have 3 warm meals a day. So the amount of calories they take in is the same, but they just don't burn enough because they're less active now. They don't move around the platform that much, but they sit in these control rooms, and then you just create another problem in that aspect, I guess.
Yeah.
But I was thinking exactly the same when you mentioned it.
So Vanessa, with all the work that you've been doing in this area, in terms of research, you mentioned a 7 to 7 schedule, and I've seen lots of varying schedules across oil and gas: 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., 11 p.m. to 11 a.m., 12 noon to 12 midnight, and so on. Did you manage to, or do you have any comments on what might be the best roster schedule in oil and gas for a 24/7 operation?
I unfortunately can't give you the golden ticket to what would be the ideal schedule. I know, so I myself, I have looked at the 7-to-7 schedule. So that's the only schedule I've really looked at. And there were some people that had to do like an on-call night shift, but that was like maybe 1 or 2 individuals. So I can't also extrapolate the results on a bigger scale. And just knowing from the other few offshore field study research papers that have looked at different shifts, there are pros and cons to a lot of them. In general, what I found is that, so basically I monitored my study participants for the whole time that they were offshore, and also before and after, of course. But in that offshore shift, the post-shift fatigue, so that's the fatigue in the evenings, so around the 7 p.m. mark, increased steadily with time. And by the time they hit, the 14 days, it was on average, like in the going towards the being severely fatigued risk area. So even though I've not monitored them for maybe like a 3-week shift, so I don't know what might have happened in that next week that they might have been offshore. I think in general it might be good to keep it as like in a 2-week frame, because working 12-hour days for 14 consecutive days, that's quite a stretch, and that's strenuous for a lot of individuals. And I know that a lot of the offshore workers consider themselves to be these superhumans that can tackle anything, but we're just humans in the end, and at some point our energy reserves are just empty. So my suggestion would be maybe try to eliminate these longer shifts, so not having 3 or 4 weeks rotations, because people just get exhausted at some point. And they need to catch up on their sleep, because as I mentioned earlier, they sleep about an hour less every night, and that just kind of adds up.
Yeah, the reason I asked is because at a conference recently, I generated some data from biomathematical models using the safety fast model. And so taking some sample data from oil and gas, I kind of looked at your papers and Kathy Parks, and probably you and Kathy Parks have got the most amount of research in sleep in terms of oil and gas. So I looked at some of your data. I used some of the variables in terms of sleep from those papers as inputs, and then using longitude and latitude and different sort of factors of an example in Western Australia, non-specific to a client. What I said was, here's an example of 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Here's a week of days. Here's a month of days. Here's a month of nights. And you're dead right that the modeling data supports exactly what you said, Vanessa, which is basically once you go past 2 weeks, the risk significantly increases. And in particularly, once you go past a week of straight night shifts, the risk starts to really increase as well. So, we looked at different start times as well, and some of those models to show people as examples. And I would agree with you that somewhere between 6 and 7 a.m. in the morning for a start time, and somewhere around 6 and 7 in the evening as a finish time, and then a start for a night shift is probably best, as opposed to midday to midnight. And then if you can limit it to a maximum of 14 days offshore. But obviously that becomes difficult because there's costs associated with flying choppers out to get people out. There's all those logistics costs as well, which can be quite difficult. People want to maximize time off as well. So I know some companies have compromised and went with 3 weeks and went 7 to 7. But you're dead right that the modeling data, based upon the sleep values that you and others have collected and what we've seen in the mining industry, would indicate that past 2 weeks, you really start to significantly increase risk. And I think this is an area that should be probably looked at more broadly in terms of mining, oil and gas, about generating some data to show people this. But yeah, that's a bit of a side note for future research.
Yeah, and no, for sure. And one thing I haven't looked at, but I know from other research papers, trying to eliminate actually swing shifts, so that they change. So they might start with a week of night shift and then do a week of day shift after, even though it might help them go back into like their normal life afterwards, because they don't have to go from night shifts to day shifts when they're with their family. But actually, it creates a 2 or 3 days fatigue peak whilst they are working and whilst they're in the middle of operations. Yeah. So I think if you ask me from a personal opinion, and people should maybe try to avoid that as well.
Yeah, I think if you're going to do a swing shift, you need to go from days to nights. So you need to do 7 days and then go to 7 nights. But going nights to days definitely is a big no-no, and really exacerbates risk and puts all the risk in the middle of the shift. So people either side of that would be the highest risk then in your 2-week period, not the end of the shift, but actually right slap bang in the middle. So yeah you're dead right. Yeah.
And maybe to sneakily introduce some of my findings as well. So we looked at what happens during the 2-week shift, and we were actually able to identify something that I thought was quite interesting. And it was a third quarter phenomenon that we've termed it that. So it's actually not that the highest fatigue scores were noticed at the day 14 of a 2-week shift, but it was actually on the day 10, 11 that fatigue was the highest. And when you speak to the offshore workers, they immediately recognize it without, terming it or without having data to back it up. But they say, yeah, no, that's completely right. At some point you just hit this block and then you think, oh, I've been here for such a long time. I still have some days to go. And then it's this motivational dip that they experience. And then something changes and they don't look at the time that has passed, but the time that is about to come. And then it's only, but I only have 2-3 more days left. And then they have this motivation kick in, and they somehow pull themselves out of the, I'm going to call it a subjective fatigue experience, and they're fine or better after. Not fine, I shouldn't say fine, but they're better after. So it's that third quarter effect. So a fatigue peak on day 10 or 11, and then it stabilizes a bit after. So I thought that was very interesting, especially when you plan your work. So maybe try not to have a safety critical task planned for your workforce on that particular day, or maybe the 2 days, and do it before or after.
And certainly as well, in addition to that, not at the end of the shift as well, like, because what you were saying is as you get past like the 10th hour, that's when risk increases as well in terms of self-reported fatigue. So definitely try to avoid that as well from a daily perspective.
Yeah, certainly.
So Vanessa, where to next with your research and your career? Will you continue working at Shell? Will you go into academia? Will you go off and lie on a beach for a few years? What's next?
I like that last option. Unfortunately, I have not earned enough money yet to allow myself to just live on the beach for a few years. No, I even when I started doing my PhD, I was fully employed by Shell. So I have a long-term contract. So it was always my plan just to stay with Shell. Yeah. And but I do really like this link between industry and academia, because I can feed it back immediately. And it feels like sometimes when you're in academia, you're doing all this great research, but you never know if somebody does anything with it. And of course, I can't promise anyone that I will be able to change the world even within Shell. But at least I feel like I'm closer to the action, and I do have, let's say, a forum or platform to really maybe influence some of the key decision makers for my company at least. And it's not gonna. I know that I can't change everything that I want to change, but at least I get the ideas that are like the seeds planted in the head, and hopefully that will influence some of the decision making. That's all I can hope for. So yeah, I'm planning to stay with Shell, and hopefully still be somehow involved in research. And there's at the moment one PhD student who's using my data also for her study, and she focuses on the physical activity and sleep. So that link, because the actigraph data that we have also captures movement during the day. So she's doing analyses with that. So I will still be involved in her papers in that respect. So that's nice. I'm not completely lost, losing my touch with academia. And at the moment, I'm working in as a health, safety, and environmental analyst, but we're looking at digital solutions. So really trying to capture our health, safety, and environmental data better, and providing it to more people so that more people actually see the data and can take actionable data-driven actions afterwards, and then they can make decisions based on the data. So I feel like I'm kind of staying a bit in that research area, although it's less academic as it was before, but just trying to help people understand the data better and do better analyses on it. And that's still in the health and safety area. So I've not lost touch completely, but so that's what I'm currently doing, and let's see where I go from there.
Yeah, that's good. I think lots of similarities in the work that I do in terms of you want to translate that research findings into practical application, and you want to truly make a difference, with respect to businesses and so on. So I can tell you already, Vanessa, your work is highly utilized by us in our business, and Melius Consulting. We have referenced your work on numerous times in the last few months, and we have presented some of your data up on some slides, and we've also referenced you in a number of business reports and white papers that we've done for companies. So I'll probably share those with you afterwards if you wish to look at them. But to let you know that your data is being used here in Australia and worldwide through our consultancy business, so you are making an impact. So I definitely thank you for pumping out this research, and it's great to see people in the mining, oil and gas area produce this stuff. Like I said at the start, I've been involved in this area for over 10 years, kind of just honing my skills in the sleep fatigue management area and broadly in health and safety and operations for 22 years. And I remember back in 2009 and 10 that IPECIA and OGP in the oil and gas area and ICMM, International Council of Minerals and Metals, we hosted 2 workshops, one in Johannesburg and one here in Perth. I organised the one here in Perth with Dr. David Flower from BP. And it's such an area that needs to be focused on continually, and we constantly have to collaborate on. And so I think it's great to see people like yourself pumping out this research to help not only the academic field but also the business field as well. And it's greatly needed, in the area. So it's I think keep going. I'm glad to hear you're still doing more research, and I'm sure we'll probably collaborate down the line, and I'd love to, but I just think keep going as much as you can. If any sort of link you have back into getting publications out in this field, it's welcomed by all.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, thank you so much for the recognition. It's great to hear that actually research is being used and knowledge is being spread. And so I continuously get basically drawn back into the sleep and fatigue area, which I love. And it's actually, we're working with also David Flower, so it's across industries, so from the global benchmarking group kind of initiative, and that revolves around road safety and fatigue. So looking at IVMS data and how we can better manage fatigue on the road.
Yes.
And I think in general, the sleep and fatigue area is such an exciting research field to be in the next few years as well, because so much new gadgets are coming up, and the idea of continuously monitoring our stats, I think it's just kind of landing in the overall population. So many people have Fitbits now, and I don't know, iPhone or the Apple Watches, and I think we'll be able to generate lots and lots more data that we can use to really get better insights on everyone's sleep and fatigue.
Look, that's a great way to end this podcast today, Vanessa. I really appreciate you taking the time out to have a chat to us today. We will put Vanessa's bio and picture into the show notes, and any contact links there to contact Vanessa. Vanessa, thank you very much for coming on Sleep for Performance Radio. I hope you can come on again when you start releasing more papers and have a chat about your work in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, and that concludes the episode for August. So thank you very much for tuning in to this month's episode of Sleep for Performance Radio. And once again, thank you very much to Vanessa for participating in the recording today. I know it was quite early in the Netherlands for her, so really appreciate that. Don't forget to check out the show notes to find out more about Vanessa's background, and also you can contact Vanessa if you wish directly. Her email address is in there as well. Next month we'll have Dr. Meta Singh on, talking about sleep and sleep problems in athletes. So a bit of a different flavour. Dr. Meta Singh is based in the US, and she works with numerous professional teams in NFL, basketball, and so on. So it'll be a little different twist as opposed to the industry stuff. And in September, I'll also be on the road a fair bit. One, I'll be on holidays, and then two, I'll be in Vancouver for World Sleep. So I'm hoping to come back from that conference with lots of good ideas and even a few extra special episodes and audio recordings. Until next month, sleep well.